A rainy night's offering. Rain lashed relentlessly against the bakery's venerable windows, a ceaseless percussion since dusk. It was the sort of night that transformed the oven's glow into a defiant, miniature sun, and the mingled scents of yeast and cinnamon into a bulwark against the raw dampness seeping from the street. Noah, polishing the stainless steel counter for what felt like the dozenth time, observed the blurred dance of umbrellas passing by. Most figures scuttled past, heads bowed, hastening towards the solace of home. Then he spotted him. Officer Miller stood beneath the feeble lamplight across the street, his patrol car a dark, brooding silhouette behind him. He remained motionless, neither directing traffic nor speaking into his radio. He simply stood, shoulders hunched, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. His uniform, typically impeccable, appeared heavy and sodden. Even from this distance, Noah perceived the profound slump in his bearing, a weariness transcending mere physical exhaustion. It was an anomaly for Chris, who usually carried himself with an almost rigid rectitude, a quiet authority that seemed to keep the world at bay. Noah's gaze lingered. He'd encountered Chris countless times on his beat, occasionally popping into the bakery for coffee during lulls. Chris was invariably polite, efficient, his eyes a curious shade of stormy gray, quick to observe, slow to reveal. Tonight, however, those eyes were unfocused, lost somewhere in the swirling wetness of the night. A familiar knot tightened in Noah's chest. He glanced at the cooling rack, where a fresh batch of apple turnovers, still radiating warmth, gleamed with golden brown crusts. A small promise of comfort. Without a moment's hesitation, Noah grabbed a paper bag and tongs, moving to the back. He brewed a potent Earl Grey, its fragrant steam rising in a comforting plume. It was a simple offering, a silent overture, but it felt right. He knew Chris wouldn't enter, not like this, not looking so utterly exposed. Slipping into his rain jacket, Noah pushed open the bakery door. The bell above chimed softly, a solitary note in the downpour. The cold struck him instantly, sharp and bracing, but the warmth of the pastry bag in his hand served as a small anchor. He crossed the street, puddles splashing around his worn boots. Chris didn't register Noah's presence until he was almost beside him. He flinched slightly, his head snapping up, those gray eyes suddenly alert, though still clouded by an unspoken burden. A flicker of surprise, then something akin to embarrassment crossed his face. "Officer Miller," Noah murmured, his voice a soft counterpoint to the rain's roar. He extended the bag. "Thought you might appreciate these, fresh from the oven, and some tea." Chris stared at the bag, then at Noah's face, searching for something. Pity? Curiosity? Noah simply offered a small, gentle smile, his own eyes conveying a quiet understanding. He didn't press, didn't elaborate, just let the simple offering hang in the damp air between them. Slowly, Chris reached out, his gloved hand nearly brushing Noah's as he took the bag. His fingers, usually so purposeful, seemed hesitant. He gripped the warm paper, its heat a stark contrast to the night's chill. "Noah," he said, his voice a little rough, as if unused, "you didn't have to." "Everyone needs a bit of warmth on a night like this," Noah replied, shrugging lightly. He gestured vaguely towards the bakery's inviting glow. "And the tea will help." Chris nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. He pulled the drawstring of the bag open, the sweet, buttery scent of baked apple wafting out. For a moment, he just inhaled, a deep, shuddering breath. He took a sip of the hot tea, his shoulders relaxing almost imperceptibly. Noah remained beside him, neither speaking nor questioning. He simply stood, a quiet presence in the deluge. The rain continued its ceaseless assault, yet the space around them felt oddly still, insulated by the shared quiet. Chris leaned against the lamppost, cradling the teacup, taking small bites of the turnover. Each bite seemed to ease some of the tension from his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. He didn't offer an explanation for his mood, and Noah didn't expect one. Some burdens were too weighty for words, especially beneath the harsh glare of a lamppost on a public street. Finally, Chris finished the pastry, wiping a stray flake of crust from his lip with his thumb. He looked at Noah, a flicker of something new in his eyes, gratitude, perhaps, and a hint of something more vulnerable, something akin to relief. "Thank you," he said again, his voice clearer this time, stronger. "Really, it means a lot." Noah simply nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He didn't need elaborate thanks. The quiet acceptance, the subtle easing of Chris's burden was sufficient. He felt a faint warmth spread through his own chest, a quiet satisfaction. He turned to go, giving Chris the space he clearly needed. "Noah." He paused, looking back. Chris was still standing there, but his gaze was steadier now, more present. I'll see you around." It wasn't a question or even a promise, but it felt like one. It felt like a small, tentative bridge had been built between them, woven from warm pastry and silent understanding, stretching across a rainy, lonely night. Noah offered another soft smile. "Good night, Officer Miller. Stay safe." He turned, walking back towards the bakery, the warmth of the encounter lingering, a quiet hum against the chill. The bell chimed again as he re-entered his shop, marking the end of one moment, and perhaps the beginning of another. The start of a routine. The scent of cinnamon and brewing coffee still clung to Officer Miller's uniform, a subtle comfort that had seen him through the rest of that rain-soaked night. He hadn't expected to return to the bakery. Not really. His life was one of rigid schedules and predictable patrols, not spontaneous acts of kindness and unexpected warmth. Yet the following Tuesday, as the pre-dawn light began to paint the sky in hues of soft gray and pale rose, Chris found himself pulling his cruiser to the curb across from Hayes's bakery. It was an hour before his shift officially began, an hour he usually spent nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee in the quiet solitude of his apartment. He hesitated, a hand on the door handle, a strange mix of self-consciousness and a quiet pull drawing him inside. He told himself it was for the coffee. The instant stuff at home tasted like regret. But as he pushed open the bakery door, the familiar chime announcing his arrival, he knew it was more than just caffeine. Noah was already behind the counter, kneading a fresh batch of dough with a rhythmic, almost meditative grace. He looked up, a gentle smile gracing his lips, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Officer Miller," Noah said, his voice soft. "Good morning." "Chris," he corrected, a slight flush rising on his neck. "Just Chris." He cleared his throat. "And you can call me Noah, then." "Noah," Chris repeated, the name feeling surprisingly comfortable on his tongue. "Just, coffee today, Noah. Black." Noah nodded, turning to the espresso machine. The hiss and gurgle filled the brief silence, a domestic symphony far removed from the city's usual morning cacophony. Chris found himself watching Noah's hands, strong and dusted with flour, moving with an easy efficiency. He noticed the slight crinkle at the corners of Noah's eyes when he smiled, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. The coffee was excellent, rich and dark, a stark contrast to the bitterness he was used to. He drank it slowly, leaning against the counter, the warmth seeping into him. They didn't talk much. Just small, comfortable silences punctuated by the clatter of baking trays and the quiet hum of the refrigerators. As Chris left, the sky was fully light, and the city was slowly stirring to life. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time. The next week, Chris returned, and the week after that. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, more of an unconscious drift towards the warmth and quiet understanding he found there. Soon, it became a quiet ritual. 3 times a week before his shift, Chris would stop at Hayes's bakery, He'd order his black coffee, sometimes a plain scone, and lean against the counter, observing Noah as he prepared for the day. Noah, in turn, began to anticipate his visits. He'd have the coffee brewing, sometimes even a fresh scone set aside. He noticed the subtle changes in Chris's demeanor, the slight slump of his shoulders on a particularly rough morning, the faint lines of fatigue beneath his eyes after a long night, or the rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually guarded face. Their conversations began to stretch, from simple greetings to brief exchanges about the weather, the dwindling supply of a particular flower, or a quiet observation about the city waking up. "Rough night?" Noah asked one blustery morning, sliding a steaming mug across the counter. Chris looked particularly drawn, his uniform slightly rumpled. Chris sighed, running a hand over his face. "Just to one of those nights, some things you can't unsee." He took a long sip of his coffee, the warmth a welcome balm. "Thanks for this, Noah. Always hits the spot." Noah just offered a sympathetic hum, not pressing for details, which Chris appreciated. He didn't want to burden Noah with the grim realities of his job. Instead, Noah simply offered a small plate with a warm apple turnover, still slightly glistening with sugar. "You look like you could use it." Chris took a bite, the familiar taste of sweet apples and flaky pastry, a moment of pure, unadulterated comfort in the chaos of his life. "You always know, don't you?" he murmured around a mouthful. Noah just smiled, a quiet, knowing look in his eyes. "Someone has to look out for you, Chris." The words hung in the air, a gentle tether forging an invisible connection between them. Chris felt a strange warmth spread through him, not just from the coffee or the turnover, but from the simple, unvarnished care in Noah's voice. It was a novel feeling, and one he found himself increasingly drawn to. He finished his coffee, feeling a quiet strength returning, ready to face the day's duties. As he stepped back out into the bustling street, the city no longer felt quite so cold, quite so indifferent. Shared stories, growing trust. The scent of cinnamon and brewing coffee had become a comfort, a signal to Chris that the day's anxieties were still at bay. He'd found himself lingering longer these mornings, the comfortable silence between him and Noah slowly evolving into something more substantial. One Tuesday, as Noah carefully arranged glazed crullers in a display case, Chris recounted the tale of a particularly stubborn feline. This cat, right, decided the top of the old oak on Elm Street was its new kingdom, crying for 3 days straight, driving Mrs. Henderson absolutely mad. "I tried everything, ladders, coaxing, even dangling a tuna fish sandwich. Nothing." Chris paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Finally, I had to call the fire department, and when they got there with their big truck and siren, the cat just sauntered down like it had been waiting for its grand exit all along, didn't even look back." Noah chuckled, a soft, warm sound that made the bakery feel even cozier. He leaned against the counter, hands tucked into the pockets of his apron, his gaze steady and attentive. "A true arboreal monarch," he murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Just needed a royal procession." Chris laughed outright, a genuine, unburdened sound that seemed to surprise even himself. He realized then that he hadn't just told Noah a story. He'd shared it. This wasn't the clipped, professional recounting he might give a colleague, nor the guarded version for acquaintances. This was an anecdote offered freely, with all its humorous absurdity. Noah felt a warmth spread through him, a pleasant, almost electric current. It wasn't just the satisfaction of seeing Chris smile, but the quiet understanding that Chris had chosen him to share this with. It felt like a small, precious gift. This glimpse into the lighter side of Chris's often demanding world. Noah, ever the observer, picked up on the subtle shift in Chris's posture, the way his shoulders seemed a fraction less rigid, the relaxed cadence of his voice. He was letting his guard down, even if just a little. As the weeks unfolded, these shared stories became a quiet highlight of Noah's mornings. Chris began to paint a picture of his life beyond the uniform, the exasperating but ultimately rewarding moments with the city's eccentric residents, the occasional laugh shared with a partner on patrol, the mundane beauty found in an unexpected sunrise over the city skyline during an early shift. He spoke of the camaraderie with his squad, the pressure of making split-second decisions, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone in genuine need. Noah, in turn, offered his own gentle observations about the rhythms of the bakery, the personalities of his regulars, the satisfaction of perfecting a new recipe. He didn't have dramatic tales of heroism, but he had the quiet wisdom gleaned from early mornings and the patience of a craftsman. He listened intently, his soft eyes reflecting a deep empathy that Chris found surprisingly soothing. He never offered unsolicited advice, never judged, simply absorbed Chris's words with an understanding that transcended mere listening. One particularly gray morning, Chris confided about a difficult call, a domestic dispute that had left him feeling hollowed out. He spoke in low tones, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his coffee cup. Noah didn't interrupt, didn't even offer a platitude. Instead, he simply slid a fresh, still warm cinnamon roll across the counter. Its sugary scent filled the small space, a small, tangible comfort. It's a lot sometimes, Chris admitted, finally looking up, his eyes a little tired. You see the worst of it, and you try to fix it, but some things, you just can't. Noah nodded slowly. No, he agreed softly, his voice a balm. Some things you can't fix, but you can be there, and that's a lot. Chris looked at him, truly looked at him, and in Noah's steady gaze he found an unexpected wellspring of quiet strength. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from physical prowess or authority, but a deeper, more resilient kind, the strength of unwavering kindness and unwavering presence. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, an emotion he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. In this small, unassuming bakery, amidst the comforting aroma of baked goods, Chris was beginning to feel seen, understood, and surprisingly, a little less alone. The boundaries of his carefully constructed world were subtly shifting, softening around the edges, and the quiet baker with the kind eyes was at the heart of that change. A quiet comfort. The bell above the bakery door jingled a mournful, solitary note as Chris pushed it open. It was well past closing, the golden hour light long faded, replaced by the soft, warm glow of Noah's work lights from the back. The scent of yeast and cinnamon, usually a comforting embrace, felt almost accusatory tonight, a reminder of a piece he couldn't quite touch. Chris's uniform, usually crisp despite the demands of his job, looked rumpled, a telltale crease across his forehead deeper than usual. His eyes, though, were what truly gave him away, dark, distant, reflecting something he couldn't articulate. He didn't even bother with his usual dry greeting. He just slumped onto a stool at the counter, dropping his gear bag with a dull thud. Noah emerged from the back, flour dusting his apron like a fine mist. He took one look at Chris, his usually calm demeanor shifting almost imperceptibly. No questions, no forced cheer. He simply poured 2 mugs of strong, dark coffee, pushing one across the counter without a word. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a sanctuary, a quiet acknowledgement of the weight Chris carried. Chris wrapped his hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into his chilled palms. He stared into the swirling black liquid, trying to find a narrative thread for the day, but it all felt too tangled, too raw. He'd seen things today, felt things that burrowed deep, leaving a cold residue in their wake. A domestic dispute that escalated into something far uglier than anyone anticipated, a child's terrified cries echoing in his memory. Rough one. Noah's voice was a low murmur, not an interrogation. Chris nodded, a jerky motion. Yeah, real rough. He took a long sip of coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort. Just people, you know, what they do to each other. He trailed off, the words feeling inadequate for the horror he'd witnessed. He didn't need to explain further. Noah's gaze was steady, understanding, reflecting a quiet empathy that bypassed the need for verbose explanations. Noah moved with a practiced ease, pulling out a large mixing bowl, a scale, and bags of flour. He began to measure, scoop, and stir, the rhythmic sounds a soothing counterpoint to Chris's internal turmoil. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just was, a grounding presence in the swirling chaos of Chris's mind. After a while, Chris found himself watching Noah's hands, strong and gentle as they kneaded the dough. The simple, deliberate movements were hypnotic. He felt a sliver of the tension in his shoulders begin to release. You ever just, want to unsee something? Chris finally said, his voice hoarse. Just hit a reset button on the whole damn day? Noah paused his kneading, his hands still buried in the yielding dough. He looked up, his eyes meeting Chris's across the counter. Sometimes, he said softly. But then, I remember, the good parts wouldn't be as good without the bad to compare them to. He offered a small, almost imperceptible shrug. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is make something new. He then pushed a small, perfectly formed ball of dough aside. This one's for you, he said, a faint smile touching his lips, a sunflower seed rye. For strength. Chris felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that pushed back against the day's cold grip. A loaf of bread just for him. Not a pity offering, not a transaction, but a quiet, earnest gesture of care. It was the most profound comfort anyone had offered him all day, perhaps all week. The simple act spoke volumes, reinforcing the unique, unspoken connection that had begun to form between them, an anchor in the turbulent waters of his life. He watched Noah return to his main task, his movements deliberate, creating something beautiful and tangible from raw ingredients. Chris knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would be back, not just for the coffee or the bread, but for the quiet comfort, the safe harbor Noah offered, where he could simply be without explanation or judgment. Natural rhythms. The aroma of yeast and warm sugar had become inextricably linked with Chris's presence. A week after his first unexpected delivery, Chris materialized again, just as Noah grappled with a new shipment of flour sacks at the back door. Each weighed 25 pounds. Noah, despite his sturdy frame, typically required multiple, grunting trips. Chris merely observed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Need a hand with that baker man, he rumbled, his voice a low thrum. Noah, flushed and slightly winded, simply nodded, stepping aside. Chris then effortlessly hoisted 2 sacks, one under each arm, carrying them with an almost casual grace into the storage room. The air, thick with canvas and flour, seemed to shift, and an unexpected warmth unfurled in Noah's chest. It wasn't solely the physical respite. It was the quiet, unbidden assistance, the way Chris instinctively perceived what needed doing. From that day, a new cadence began to interweave with the bakery's established routines. Chris's appearances grew more frequent, often out of uniform, in a worn t-shirt and jeans. He carried the faint scent of clean laundry and something else, a subtle, earthy note Noah found surprisingly appealing. He'd arrive in the late afternoon just as Noah was concluding the day's baking or tidying up. He never explicitly offered help, yet always found a way, counters gleaming under his methodical efficiency. Spice jars aligned with almost military precision, a task Noah hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Noah watched, captivated, as Chris meticulously folded dozens of linen napkins, each crease sharp and true. A quiet intensity imbued his movements, a focus that belied the gruff exterior he often presented. Noah, typically reserved, found himself conversing more, not about profound personal matters, but the mundane intricacies of the bakery. The sourdough's humid bubbling, the elusive flakiness of croissants, the sheer joy of a perfect crust. Chris would listen, his gaze unwavering, occasionally interjecting with a surprisingly insightful comment or a dry, understated joke that elicited a bark of laughter from Noah. "You know, you could probably bake a pretty decent loaf yourself," Noah remarked one evening, watching Chris knead a small batch of dough, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Chris grunted. "Too much waiting. I prefer things to happen quicker." He paused, then added, "Though I suppose some things are worth the wait." His eyes, for a fleeting moment, met Noah's, and an undeniable, subtle current passed between them. The silences, too, deepened into comfort. They'd often sit together, Chris with Noah's strong coffee, Noah with herbal tea, simply existing within the bakery's quiet hum. Noah might sketch new pastry designs, Chris perhaps reading a newspaper, but the shared space felt effortless, unforced. It was a haven where the weight of Chris's work seemed to lift, if only for a few hours. Noah discovered himself anticipating Chris's arrival with an almost childlike eagerness. He'd catch himself clock-watching, wondering if today would be a Chris day. He'd unconsciously set aside small tasks, heavy sugar bags, a particularly sticky mixing bowl, knowing Chris would handle them without a word. It wasn't reliance, precisely, but a blossoming comfort in shared effort, in the silent understanding that had bloomed between them. One blustery afternoon, Chris assisted Noah in loading a tray of warm loaves into the display case. The rich aroma of fresh bread mingled with the faint scent of rain clinging to Chris's jacket. As their hands brushed, a jolt, quick and unexpected, shot through Noah. Chris paused, his gaze dropping to their intertwined fingers for a fraction of a second before withdrawing his hand, his expression unreadable. "Right." Chris cleared his throat, his voice a little rougher than usual. "Looks like you're all set here." He turned to leave, but then hesitated, his hand on the doorframe. I'll see you around, Noah." Noah merely nodded, a strange warmth spreading through him, a feeling that transcended the heat from the oven. The bakery, usually a realm of solitary creation, felt fuller, richer whenever Chris was there. And now, in his absence, it felt a little emptier, yet pregnant with the promise of his return. Unfamiliar warmth. The comforting aroma of cinnamon and yeast, usually a familiar anchor in Noah's solitary world, had recently begun to share space with a different kind of warmth. It was subtle, yet persistent, like the lingering heat from a cooling oven. This wasn't merely the physical contact of Chris's shoulder brushing his or their synchronized grunts wrestling a heavy sack of flour. It was a deeper current, residing in their unspoken understanding, in the unhurried way Chris's gaze would assess him when he spoke. Noah found himself smiling more, a genuine, unforced upturn of his lips, even in Chris's absence. The bakery, once his carefully constructed sanctuary, now felt like a shared domain. Chris's presence, initially an unexpected intrusion, had settled into an anticipated rhythm. Noah recognized the burgeoning tenderness, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, not since he'd built these protective walls. It was a warmth that thawed forgotten corners of his being, a gentle defrosting that was both exhilarating and faintly terrifying. He'd begun to anticipate the morning clink of keys, the creak of the door, and Chris's strong silhouette against the dawn, even if all that followed was a terse morning. Meanwhile, Chris wrestled with insomnia, his mind typically a meticulously organized archive of cases and protocols, now resembled a jumbled file cabinet. The culprit, he knew, was Noah, or more precisely, the unfamiliar stirrings Noah provoked. This wasn't the fleeting appreciation of a pleasant face or the easy camaraderie he shared with his patrol partners. This was a distinct, persistent hum beneath his skin, an inexplicable pull that defied classification. He'd catch himself observing Noah, not just the efficient choreography of his hands kneading dough, but the way a lock of hair fell across his brow or the subtle crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he laughed. These observations weren't professional nor even casual. They felt intimate. And that intimacy, in a context he'd never contemplated, was profoundly unsettling. One afternoon, as Noah elucidated the delicate art of tempering chocolate, his fingers brushed Chris's during a demonstration. A jolt, entirely unrelated to static electricity, coursed through Chris. It was a visceral tremor, a sudden, potent awareness of Noah's proximity, the scent of vanilla mingling with something uniquely Noah. Clean, warm, a touch sweet. Chris instinctively withdrew his hand, almost imperceptibly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Noah, absorbed in his explanation, seemed oblivious, but Chris felt it. The catch in his breath, the sudden warmth spreading through his chest, a sensation both pleasant and deeply perplexing. Later that evening, Chris sat at his kitchen table, a half-eaten meal growing cold. His thoughts were a tangled knot. He'd always prided himself on his clarity, his ability to dissect situations and understand motives. But this felt like trying to grasp smoke. He replayed the day's interactions, the easy banter, the comfortable silences, the brief touch. Each memory brought with it that strange, unfamiliar tug. He contemplated the feeling Noah's gaze ignited, not casual regard, but a look that seemed to strip away layers to truly see him. It was disarming, almost invasive, yet not unwelcome. A sense of being understood without articulating the burdens he carried. He'd always believed he knew himself. A cop, a protector, a man who found solace in routine and predictability. This new sensation, this confusing, undeniable magnetism toward Noah didn't fit anywhere within his established framework. It was an anomaly, a rogue variable in the carefully ordered equation of his life. Running a hand through his hair, a grimace on his face, he acknowledged this uncharted, deeply perplexing territory. For the first time in a long time, Chris felt a genuine fear, not of external threats, but of something internal, something he couldn't fight, couldn't outsmart, and most terrifyingly, something he might not want to. A glimpse into Chris's world. The lingering perfume of cinnamon and warm yeast still clung to Noah's apron when Chris entered that Tuesday afternoon, an unannounced visit. Sunlight lanced through the bakery window, illuminating a ballet of dust motes and streaking the worn wooden floor with long shadows. Noah, lost in the quiet cadence of wiping the counter, didn't immediately notice Chris leaning against the doorframe, a faint smile playing on his lips. Busy day? Chris's voice, a low rumble, seemed to effortlessly cut through the bakery's gentle hum. Noah shook his head. Winding down. Just a few more loaves to cool. He gestured to the racks in the back, where the rich scent of baking bread still held court. Everything all right? Chris pushed off the frame, stepping deeper into the shop. Yeah, everything's good. Just wondering if you had plans this Saturday? Noah paused, the damp cloth arrested mid-motion. Saturday? Not really. Why? His Saturdays rarely strayed from flower and dawn. There's a community picnic down at Miller Park. My family always goes. Some of the guys from the precinct, too, Chris explained, a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. It's pretty relaxed. Good food, a band sometimes. Thought maybe you'd want to come. Noah's heart gave a little jolt, an invitation to Chris's world beyond the bakery's quiet haven. It was unexpected, yet a gentle thrill resonated through him. A picnic, he murmured, a soft smile touching his lips. I'd like that, Chris. Thank you. Saturday dawned, bright and balmy, an ideal day for an outdoor gathering. Noah spotted Chris easily amidst the sprawling blankets and laughter at Miller Park. Chris, in a casual polo and jeans, seemed less formidable than his uniformed counterpart, more approachable. He waved Noah over, a genuine warmth radiating from him. Noah, glad you could make it, Chris said, his hand settling on Noah's shoulder, a gesture that was becoming less startling, more familiar. Come meet everyone. Noah was swept into a flurry of introductions. Chris's parents, whose smiles were immediately kind. His older sister, who promptly offered a plate mounded with barbecue and potato salad. And a lively group of Chris's police colleagues. Noah soon found himself laughing with Officer Reyes, a sharp-eyed woman whose wit was as quick as her infectious chuckle. So, you're the baker Chris can't stop talking about, Reyes teased, nudging him playfully. He usually just grunts when we ask about his day. Now it's all the new sourdough and Noah's lemon bars. Noah felt a blush creep up his neck. He just likes good food. He demurred, though a pleasant heat spread through him at the thought of Chris mentioning him. Chris, returning with a refilled plate, overheard the tail end of their banter. Reyes, leave him alone, he chided, though his tone lacked real bite. Noah, grab some lemonade. My mom makes a killer batch. As the afternoon matured, Noah observed Chris within his family and friends. He glimpsed a different facet of him. Relaxed, jovial, teasing his father, sharing anecdotes with his sister, and laughing easily with fellow officers. It was a comforting, vibrant tableau, and Noah felt a quiet contentment settle in his chest. This was Chris's life, the one he returned to after demanding shifts, and Noah was, for today, a small part of it. Later, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink, Noah helped Chris pack a cooler. Reyes approached, grabbing a bottle of water. Remember that time, Chris, when Sarah tried to make her famous 7-layer dip for this picnic? Reyes chuckled, shaking her head. Pretty sure it was actually 7 layers of mayonnaise. You were such a good sport, though, pretending to like it. Chris rolled his eyes, a fond smile gracing his lips. It wasn't that bad. Just, ambitious. Noah's movements faltered, the plastic lid of the cooler clutched in his hand. Sarah. A past girlfriend, the name, casually dropped, landed with an unexpected weight. He hadn't really considered Chris's romantic history, not in any concrete way. A strange, unfamiliar pang shot through him, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. Yet it tightened in his chest. It was a fleeting moment, gone as quickly as it arrived, but it left a faint, lingering unease. He quickly snapped the lid onto the cooler, forcing a smile. Sounds, memorable, Noah managed, the words feeling a little stiff. Chris, engrossed in a conversation with Reyes about a recent case, didn't seem to notice. The sun dipped lower, elongating the shadows, and the park began to empty. Noah felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet reminder of boundaries he was just beginning to explore. The sudden silence. Usually, the fragrance of cinnamon rolls enveloped Noah's kitchen by 7, a comforting embrace that signaled the true start of the day. But, for the past 3 mornings, an essential ingredient was missing. The delicate clink of a mug, the low hum of Chris's voice, the familiar solidity by the counter, all were absent. It began subtly. Chris had skipped a single morning, then 2. Noah, ever the pragmatist, rationalized that Chris was simply busy. Work, family, life. His job was demanding. Yet by the 4th day, the quietude in the bakery felt heavier, almost accusatory. Noah found his gaze straying to the clock more often, his movements subtly less fluid. He'd catch himself, kneading dough with a detached air, his mind replaying their last picnic conversation, dissecting every word for a possible misstep. Had he said something amiss? Was the casual mention of Sarah an unwitting probe into an old wound for Chris? He chided himself for overthinking. Chris wasn't obligated to appear daily. Still, an undeniable ache, a quiet emptiness settled in his chest. It was the sensation of a carefully cultivated rhythm abruptly shattered, a familiar solace withdrawn without explanation. He immersed himself in extra baking, the rhythmic push and pull of dough, a balm to his swirling thoughts. His hands, usually so intuitive with flour and water, felt slightly clumsy, a beat off. He found himself adding a touch more vanilla to the day's pastries, a subconscious attempt to fill the void with something sweeter, richer. A week bled into the next. The space Chris once occupied now felt like a gaping chasm. Noah would sometimes instinctively reach for an extra mug only to retrieve it with a sigh. He hadn't called, hesitant to intrude, to appear desperate. He trusted Chris to initiate contact if he desired, but the silence stretched, growing taut between them, a cord ready to snap. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as Noah made a delivery to the community center, he saw him. Chris emerged from the police station across the street, his uniform crisp, sunlight glinting off his badge. His stride was the same, purposeful. But a subtle tension in his shoulders caught Noah's eye, a stiffness he hadn't noticed before. "Chris," Noah called out, a rush of relief mingling with a jolt of apprehension. Chris turned, his expression unreadable. A flicker of surprise, then something guarded crossed his face. He offered a tight, almost perfunctory smile. "Noah." "Hey." Noah's heart gave a little lurch. The casual warmth that usually characterized their interactions was conspicuously absent. "Haven't seen you around," Noah ventured, striving to keep his voice light, unaffected. Chris shifted his weight, his gaze flitting around, anywhere but Noah's eyes. "Yeah, been swamped. Got a lot going on." His replies were clipped, evasive. He offered no elaboration, no hint of their usual easy camaraderie. "Oh, right," Noah said, the words falling flat in the sudden quiet. He searched Chris's face for a clue, a hint of explanation, but found only polite distance. Chris looked tired, a shadow under his eyes that Noah hadn't witnessed since their very first meeting. But this time, Noah felt no invitation to comfort, no opening for understanding. "Well, gotta run," Chris said, already turning, his hand raising in a quick, dismissive gesture. "Take care, Noah." And then he was gone, vanishing around the corner of the station, leaving Noah standing on the sidewalk, a half-empty box of pastries in his hands, utterly bewildered. The brief encounter had left him with more questions than answers, and a renewed, sharper ache in his chest. He replayed Chris's evasive words, the averted gaze, the swift departure. It wasn't anger or indifference Noah discerned, but something he couldn't quite decipher. A wall, meticulously constructed. Had he erred? The question echoed in his mind, persistent and unwelcome. He hadn't pushed, hadn't overstepped, had he? He'd only offered comfort, connection. He'd only been himself. Yet the sudden quiet, the abrupt distance, spoke volumes, leaving Noah to grapple with a quiet loneliness he hadn't anticipated, a sense of having lost something precious without ever truly possessing it. The bakery, when he returned, felt colder, the scent of cinnamon unable to entirely dispel the chill that had settled deep within him. A week of absence. The scent of warm dough and brewing coffee, usually a comfort, became a quiet torment. Each morning Noah found himself glancing towards the bakery door, a habit ingrained over months, only to meet the empty street beyond. A week. 7 mornings since Chris had last sat at the counter, his usual quiet presence a significant void. For Chris, those 7 mornings were a blur of forced routine, than internal chaos. He found himself driving a different route to the station, taking the long way around the block where Noah's bakery sat, a deliberate detour around the source of his disquiet. His usual morning coffee was now a lukewarm, store-bought affair, gulped down in the precinct break room, its blandness a stark contrast to the rich, nuanced flavors Noah always offered. He knew the reason for his avoidance, even if he couldn't articulate it without feeling a strange heat rise in his chest. The last time he'd seen Noah, the baker's quiet concern had pierced something deep inside him. A vulnerability Chris hadn't realized was so exposed. The way Noah had simply looked at him, without judgment, without asking, just understanding. It was a comfort he hadn't sought and now couldn't shake. And then there was the way Noah's hand had briefly, gently settled on his arm. A simple gesture, but it had sent a jolt through Chris. A warmth that had nothing to do with friendship or shared trauma, and everything to do with something he couldn't name. It was unsettling, exhilarating, and frankly, terrifying. He spent his shifts in a heightened state, his usual focus occasionally fractured by intrusive thoughts of Noah's quiet smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he was amused, the soft dusting of flour on his apron. He'd snap at rookies for minor infractions, his temper shorter than usual, and withdraw into himself during debriefs, his colleagues noticing the subtle shift in his demeanor. Even Captain Davies, usually oblivious to emotional undercurrents, shot him a questioning glance. At home, his usually sparse apartment felt even emptier. The silence, once a welcome reprieve, now echoed with the unspoken questions he refused to acknowledge. He'd pace the worn carpet, pick up a book only to stare blankly at the page, or stand by the window watching the city lights blur, trying to outrun the unfamiliar sensations swirling within him. He felt like a man adrift, caught in a current he couldn't see, let alone fight. The feelings were intense, disorienting, and completely outside the carefully constructed emotional framework he'd built for himself over decades. He knew loyalty, professional duty, even a quiet sense of camaraderie. But this was something else. A pull, a longing, a vulnerability that felt too exposed, too dangerous. Back at the bakery, Noah tried to mask his unease. He baked with precision, chatted with his regulars, and kept the pastry case impeccably stocked. But a faint tremor ran beneath his composed exterior. He worried. Was Chris all right? Had something happened? He replayed their last conversation, searching for a clue, a wrong word, anything that might explain the abrupt withdrawal. He remembered the tension in Chris's shoulders, the way his eyes had darted away. It wasn't anger, Noah was sure of that. It was something else, something Chris was clearly struggling with. He considered calling, texting, even showing up at the precinct. But a deep-seated respect for boundaries and perhaps a touch of his own fear of rejection held him back. Chris was a private man. If he needed space, Noah would give it. He would wait. But the waiting was a dull ache, a constant companion as he measured flour, kneaded dough, and watched the dawn break each morning, always alone. He found himself adding a little extra cinnamon to the apple turnovers, a touch more vanilla to the cream puffs, small unconscious acts of comfort for himself. The bakery, usually a bustling sanctuary, felt quieter, dimmer without Chris's presence, like a missing ingredient in a carefully balanced recipe. He missed the comfortable silence, the shared glances, the simple, profound understanding that had blossomed between them. And he worried, quietly, persistently, about the wall he sensed Chris was building, a wall that felt both protective and profoundly isolating. A small, kind note. The clatter of the cooling racks in the quiet bakery felt amplified without the familiar rhythm of Chris's morning visit. 3 days. 3 days since Noah had last seen him. 3 mornings the corner booth had remained empty, the scent of cinnamon rolls settling into the air unchallenged by Chris's robust presence. Noah found himself glancing at the bakery door with every subtle chime, a low hum of unease settling in his chest. He understood Chris's need for space, had always respected it, but the sudden, complete silence was different. It felt like a door closing, not just a pause. He tried to distract himself, kneading dough with more force than necessary, the smooth, yielding mass a poor substitute for the knot in his stomach. He replayed their last interaction, the quiet comfort, the shared breath, the almost touch. Had he overstepped? Had his concern been too transparent, too much for Chris to handle? Noah knew Chris carried a heavy weight, saw it in the shadows beneath his eyes, in the way he sometimes flinched at sudden noises. He didn't want to add to it, only to offer a brief respite. By the fourth morning, Noah couldn't simply wait anymore. The worry had grown too large to ignore, blooming into a quiet ache. He baked a fresh batch of blueberry muffins, Chris's favorite, the sweet scent filling the bakery with a fleeting, comforting warmth. He selected the two largest, their tops perfectly domed and streaked with purple, and placed them gently in a small white paper bag. Then he hesitated. What could he say? A text felt too intrusive, a phone call too direct. He wasn't trying to demand an explanation, only to extend a hand. He found a clean, crisp note card and a fine-tipped pen. His handwriting, usually neat and flowing, felt suddenly clumsy. He started, then crumpled the paper, discarding several attempts. Are you okay? Too blunt. Missing you. Too forward. He wanted to convey care, not pressure. Finally, he settled on something simple, almost understated, a reflection of his own quiet nature. Chris, just thinking of you. Hope you're doing well. These are fresh. Noah. He folded the note once, slipping it into the bag with the muffins. It felt vulnerable, this small offering, a piece of himself laid bare. He half expected to regret it, to turn back, but the urge to reach out, to bridge the sudden chasm between them was stronger than his usual reticence. Later that afternoon, when the bakery was quiet between rushes, Noah put on his light jacket. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant traffic. He walked the familiar route to the station, the paper bag swinging gently at his side. He didn't want to go inside, didn't want to cause any awkwardness or put Chris on the spot if he was there. His aim was simply to deliver, to let Chris know he hadn't forgotten him, even if Chris wanted to forget their connection. The police station, a sturdy brick building, loomed with an imposing air, yet Noah found a small, almost hidden alcove near the side entrance, used by officers for quick breaks. It was a place where a package might be noticed, but not cause a stir. He set the bag down carefully on the narrow ledge of a windowsill, nestling it against the cool brick. He wanted it to be discovered by Chris, and only Chris, a small private gesture. As he turned to leave, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. Would Chris even see it? Would he understand the intent behind the simple note and the familiar treats? Or would it be misinterpreted, another burden to an already burdened man? Noah hurried back towards the bakery, a strange mix of relief and anxiety swirling within him. He had done what he could. Now, all he could do was hope that this small, kind note, this silent offering, would find its way to Chris, and perhaps remind him that he wasn't alone. The empty corner booth still waited, but Noah felt a fraction lighter, a thread of connection tentatively re-established, whether Chris chose to grasp it or not. The quiet hum of the bakery seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting. The realization. The fluorescent lights of the precinct's break room hummed, casting a sterile glow over the chipped laminate countertop. Chris, his uniform still smelling faintly of exhaust fumes and city grit, leaned against the fridge, nursing a lukewarm mug of coffee. 3 days of deliberate distance, each one feeling longer than the last. He'd thrown himself into work with a vengeance, answering calls, filing reports, anything to outrun the unsettling quiet that had settled over him since he stopped his morning visits to Noah's bakery. His gaze drifted to the small, unassuming brown paper bag tucked beside the communal coffee machine. It wasn't standard issue, nor did it look like any of the usual takeout containers left by colleagues. A flicker of curiosity, a rare sensation lately, pricked at him. He pushed off the fridge, his heavy boots making a soft thud on the linoleum, and approached the counter. Penciled on the side of the bag in a neat, slightly slanted hand was his name, Chris. Below it, a familiar tiny sketch of a rolling pin. His breath hitched. A strange warmth, like a sudden shot of brandy, spread through his chest, chasing away some of the cold weariness that had become his constant companion. He picked up the bag, his fingers brushing against the crisp paper. It felt substantial, holding more than just a simple pastry. Inside, nestled on a square of parchment paper, were 2 blueberry muffins, perfectly domed and glistening with a sugar crust. The scent of warm berries and vanilla wafted up, instantly transporting him. Tucked beneath one of the muffins was a small, folded note. His hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as he unfolded the paper. Chris, missed seeing you these past few mornings. Hope everything's all right. Thought you might need a little pick-me-up. These are still warm, fresh from the oven. No pressure, just checking in. Noah. The words were simple, yet they resonated with a profound kindness that reached deep into the walled-off corners of his heart. Noah wasn't asking for explanations, wasn't demanding anything, just checking in. The gentle thoughtfulness was a stark contrast to the rough edges of his daily life, to the constant need for vigilance and emotional armor. He stared at the note, then at the muffins, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within him. Guilt, sharp and unwelcome for his abrupt withdrawal. Relief for being seen, for not being forgotten. And something else, something potent and unfamiliar. Something that tightened his throat and blurred his vision. He had told himself he needed space, needed to process. Whatever it was he was feeling, he'd convinced himself that the constant presence of Noah, the warmth of the bakery, the easy conversation was a distraction he couldn't afford. He was a police officer, for God's sake, not someone who indulged in feelings. He'd built his life on order, on logic, on keeping a clear head. But looking at Noah's looping script, smelling the comforting sweetness of the muffins, a truth he'd been desperately avoiding slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He didn't just miss the routine, or the coffee, or the pastries. He missed Noah. He missed the quiet understanding in Noah's eyes, the way his laugh crinkled the corners of his eyes, the genuine interest he took in Chris's day, no matter how mundane or harrowing. He missed the feeling of being truly seen, truly cared for, without judgment or expectation. The past 3 days had been an empty expanse, devoid of the unexpected pockets of joy Noah's presence brought. The world had felt grayer, sharper, less forgiving. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to rely on that small daily anchor, on the warmth and light Noah infused into his mornings. He hadn't realized how deeply Noah had burrowed into his consciousness, into his very being. A sudden fierce ache settled in his chest, a yearning so profound it startled him. He wanted to go back. He wanted to see Noah, to explain, to apologize, to simply stand in the comforting glow of his presence again. He wanted Noah. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave, sweeping away all his carefully constructed defenses, leaving him exposed and raw. He wasn't just fond of Noah, not just comfortable with him. He missed him, in a way he hadn't missed anyone in a very long time. And that feeling, terrifying as it was undeniable. He carefully refolded the note, tucking it into his breast pocket, close to his heart, The muffins could wait. First, he needed to fix this. The troubled confession. The last clatter of the cooling racks had long since merged with the industrial refrigerator's soft hum. Noah, sweeping the final crumbs from beneath the display, froze as a sharp rap sliced through the empty bakery's quiet. A frown creased his brow. It was well past closing. Streetlights outside cast exaggerated, dancing shadows through the front window. A silhouette, broad-shouldered and undeniably familiar, stood beyond the frosted glass. Noah's heart gave a strange, unexpected lurch. He leaned the broom against the counter and approached the door, his gaze finding the small, clear pane. Chris. His uniform, usually sharp, was rumpled, softened by what looked like days of wear. The calm authority typically gracing his features was now etched with unfamiliar turmoil. His eyes, meeting Noah's through the glass, held a raw vulnerability that tightened Noah's stomach. Unlocking the door, Noah pulled it inward, the bell above tinkling a soft, melancholic greeting. Chris. His voice was barely a whisper. The comforting, sweet scent of day-old pastry seemed to thicken the air between them. Chris stepped inside, a brief current of the night's chill following him before Noah closed the door. No greeting was offered, no immediate eye contact made. Instead, Chris's gaze swept the silent bakery, taking in the gleaming counters, the neat rows of empty cake stands, the faint, lingering shimmer of flour dust. His hands were jammed into his pockets, knuckles stark white against the dark fabric. "Noah," he finally rasped, his voice rough like gravel on a quiet road. He looked up, and Noah observed the deep lines of fatigue around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his jaw. I need to talk to you." Noah simply nodded, gesturing toward a small, round table near the window. He moved behind the counter, reaching for a clean mug and the electric kettle. "Coffee or tea?" he offered, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the sudden storm of Chris's presence. Chris slowly lowered himself into a chair, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Nothing, thanks. Just need to talk." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze fixing on Noah with an intensity that stole Noah's breath. "I messed up, didn't I?" Noah poured himself a glass of water, affording Chris space, sensing that pressure would only prompt retreat. "What do you mean, Chris?" he asked gently. Chris let out a ragged sigh, pushing a hand through his hair once more. "You know what I mean. The last 3 days, avoiding you, after everything." He gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the recent incident with the muffins, but weeks of shared moments, quiet conversations, and unspoken understanding. I don't know what's happening to me, Noah." The confession hung heavy and fragile in the air. Noah sat opposite him, setting his glass down with a soft click. "What do you mean, Chris?" he repeated, his gaze unwavering, an unspoken invitation to elaborate. Chris finally met his eyes, and Noah saw stark, unvarnished fear. "It's you, Noah," he whispered, strained. "It's everything about you. The way you listen, the way you understand without me having to say anything, the way you just are." He clenched his fists on the table. "I've never felt like this before. Not with anyone. It's confusing, and it scares the hell out of me." A flicker of fragile, tentative hope bloomed in Noah's chest, quickly overshadowed by a surge of empathy. He saw Chris's struggle, the genuine bewilderment in his eyes. This wasn't anger or indifference. It was profound, emotional distress. "Scared of what, Chris?" Noah asked softly, leaning forward slightly, his voice a soothing balm in the quiet bakery. Chris swallowed hard, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape, yet always returning to Noah. Of these feelings, they're so intense, and I don't understand them. I don't know what they mean, and then I pushed you away because I don't know how to deal with it. I thought if I just stopped coming here, stopped seeing you, that it would go away, but it didn't. It just made it worse." He looked at Noah, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I missed you, Noah. More than I thought possible. More than I've ever missed anyone." The admission, a raw, honest tremor, settled into the bakery's stillness. Noah listened, his expression open and accepting, allowing Chris to unravel. The words were a revelation, a window into the turbulent world Chris had been navigating alone. The tension in Chris's shoulders seemed to ease ever so slightly, as if vocalizing his confusion had lifted a burden. The bakery, usually a place of sweet comfort, had become a sanctuary for a troubled confession. "I think I'm in love." The confession hung in the air, thick and fragile like spun sugar. Noah felt his breath catch, the scent of yeast and cinnamon suddenly sharper, the low hum of the display fridge a distant drone. Chris's eyes, still bloodshot from lack of sleep, held a raw vulnerability Noah hadn't witnessed before. It was disarming, almost heartbreaking. I don't know what to do with it, Noah," Chris continued, his voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, the gesture one of profound confusion. "I've never felt anything like this. Not for anyone, and certainly not for a man." The last words were a soft exhalation, tinged with a bewilderment that seemed to emanate from his very core. Noah remained silent, allowing Chris the space to articulate the tangle of emotions he was clearly grappling with. He watched Chris's gaze drift around the bakery, as if searching for answers in the familiar surroundings, before settling back on Noah's face. There was a desperate plea in those blue depths, a request for understanding, for guidance even. It's not just the comfort, you know." Chris's brow furrowed, his attempt to explain battling against an internal wall of unfamiliarity. "It's more. I look forward to seeing you every day, even when everything else is hell." He paused, a muscle in his jaw clenching. "And when I don't see you, when I try to pull away, it felt like a part of me was missing, like an ache I couldn't put a name to." Noah's heart gave a gentle throb. To hear Chris, usually so stoic and self-contained, lay bare such profound emotional disarray was both a privilege and a heavy responsibility. He realized this wasn't just about Chris's confusion, but about the very foundations of his understanding of himself. Chris took a deep, shuddering breath, his chest rising and falling visibly. He looked directly at Noah then, his gaze unwavering, as if bracing himself for an impact. The fluorescent lights of the bakery, usually so mundane, seemed to cast a halo around his tired form, illuminating the sheer courage of his next words. "I think," Chris began, his voice a little hoarse but steady now, imbued with a newfound resolve. "I think I'm in love with you, Noah." The words, though anticipated in the quiet corners of Noah's own heart, still landed with the force of a physical blow. Not a painful one, but a deep, resonant shock that vibrated through him, settling into a warmth that spread outwards. The air in the bakery, which had been thick with tension, suddenly felt lighter, imbued with a new kind of possibility. Noah swallowed, his own voice feeling unexpectedly tight. "Chris," he began, but found himself momentarily speechless. There were so many things he wanted to say, to ask, to reassure. But more than anything, he wanted to simply acknowledge the immense weight of that confession, the trust inherent in it. Chris watched him, a flicker of fear in his eyes, as if expecting rejection, or perhaps further confusion. His hands, which had been clasped tightly, relaxed slightly, but he still seemed poised for flight. I know it's a lot," Chris managed, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "And I know it's probably Surprising. To you. And to me. Believe me, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. He offered a weak, self-deprecating smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. My whole life, I thought I knew exactly who I was, what I wanted. And then, you. Noah took a step closer, instinctively reaching out. His hand hovered, uncertain, before gently settling on Chris's arm. The warmth of Chris's skin beneath his fingertips was a familiar comfort, a grounded reality in the swirling emotional storm. "It's not surprising, Chris," Noah said softly, his voice finally finding its strength. He squeezed Chris's arm gently. "Not to me. I've felt it too. This connection, this pull." He met Chris's gaze, offering all the understanding and acceptance he could muster. "It's okay. Whatever this is, whatever you're feeling, it's okay." A visible tension drained from Chris's shoulders. He looked down at Noah's hand on his arm, then back up at Noah's face, a glimmer of relief mixed with lingering apprehension in his eyes. You're not scared?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Noah shook his head slowly. "No, Chris, I'm not scared." He paused, a small smile playing on his lips. "A little overwhelmed, maybe, but not scared." He tightened his grip on Chris's arm, a silent promise. "And we can figure this out together." The offer hung between them, a lifeline extended across a chasm of unspoken fears and unfamiliar emotions. Chris's eyes searched Noah's, as if looking for any hint of deceit, any wavering in his conviction. Finding none, a new kind of vulnerability settled over him, one that seemed less like fear and more like cautious hope. The silence that followed was different now, no longer heavy with unspoken burdens, but charged with the fragile beginnings of something profoundly new.